banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. You may be seated.
Thank you, Wendy. Welcome, everyone, to the 33rd Annual Federal Interagency Holocaust Remembrance Program. My name is Dr. Ronald Piaseczny, and I'm honored to serve as chair of the Federal Interagency Holocaust Remembrance Committee, and as an EEO program manager, soon to be case manager at the Department of Veterans Affairs, Office of Resolution Management. For over 3 decades, federal employees have come together to honor the 6 million Jews and millions of others who were murdered in the Holocaust. We gather today not only to remember, but to learn, so that never again is not empty rhetoric. We are honored to welcome representatives from nearly 50 U.S. government federal agencies, foreign dignitaries, some 29 embassies, also non-governmental organizations, leaders from across government, members of the military, Holocaust survivors and their families, and thousands of others tuning in now to our live stream. Your presence and that of our senior leaders demonstrates the power of the collective commitment to justice, memory, and human dignity. We thank you for you being here today. I stand before you today as an individual with many identities. I am both the son and grandson of Holocaust survivor, the child of a U.S. veteran. I am the child of immigrants. I am also a proud federal employee. Like many of us in this room, our family stories may be unique, but shared experiences, cultures, and histories bind us together. For many of us who are second and third generation survivors, that courage flows through our families, and the desire to be of service to others has led us to work in the public sector. It is through this connection that for the past 33 years, the Federal Interagency Holocaust Remembrance Committee has been made up of federal employees across several agencies, volunteering their time to bring this annual program together. Together, we honor those who bore witness to the most horrific periods of human history and emerged to share their stories in the knowledge that bringing light to darkness is the key to ensuring that such atrocities never resurface. We also gather here today to share in a mission. First, we must remember the Holocaust, not only for its historic tragedy, but because Holocaust as an education is an important tool to confront anti-Semitism, prejudice, and the intolerance surging around the world today. Second, we must listen to voices like those of survivors and liberators, especially those who have reached their centenary, because they carry the firsthand lessons of every generation. Third, we must act. As federal employees, we have both the responsibility and the authority to combat hate, online and offline, in our workplaces and in our communities. We are especially privileged this year to hear from our guest speaker, Colonel Frank Cohn, a Holocaust survivor and U.S. Army veteran, former Chief of Staff to the U.S. Army's Military District of Washington, who is 100 years old. Just last November, Colonel Cohn shared his story at a Veterans Day event hosted by Fort Belvoir Jewish Congregation, a powerful reminder of how personal memory and public service interweave in acts of courage and resilience. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the Department of Justice for hosting this event again this year. Your agency's leadership on the issue of combating anti-Semitism is incredible. The DOJ Civil Rights Division has been instrumental in making sure this program continued this year. Which brings me to our first speaker, Harmeet Dillon, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Justice. Ms. Dillon is a nationally recognized civil rights and constitutional law lawyer, having founded both the Dillon Law Group and the nonprofit Center for American Liberty. She was nominated by President Donald Trump in December of 2024 to serve as the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Division. Under her leadership, fighting anti-Semitism has been a top priority for the Civil Rights Division. Please join me in welcoming Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction, Ronald. It's really my honor to be here again for the second year in a row. We gather here today to honor the memory of the 6 million Jews and the countless others who lost their lives of brutal murder by Nazi Germany during the Holocaust. Men and women, girls and boys, young and old, all tragically lost their lives as a result of persecution, hatred, and evil. The atrocities committed during those dark times are beyond description, and their scale is almost incomprehensible. We gather to remember the victims of this tragedy and to explore the lessons that the present generation can learn to ensure we keep the promise of never again. And we are exploring this question today during a dark time in our own country when anti-Semitism is on the rise, both here and also globally. What makes the Holocaust unique among the various atrocities committed by some people against the powerless? Perhaps the best answer to that question came from Justice Scalia in his 1997 Holocaust Remembrance Day remarks at the Capitol. As Justice Scalia noted, the Germany of the late 1920s and early 1930s was a world leader in most fields of art, science, and intellect. Germany had the greatest medical schools and the most avant-garde theater and movie industries in the world. It was the world leader in classical music and modern architecture as well. And perhaps most importantly, it was a leader in ensuring legal equality, not mere toleration for all of its citizens. And so how could the leading light of Western civilization in the span of a few years go to war with everything that Western civilization has stood for? First, we must remember that Germany did not move overnight from everything I have just described to the gas chambers and ovens of its extermination camps. Rather, the road to Auschwitz was incremental and methodical. It began with excluding Jews from the legal, political, economic, and social life of everyday society. Second, many perpetrators of the Holocaust were often the most educated intelligentsia in Germany. For example, of the 15 participants in the Wannsee Conference, where the final solution was agreed upon, more than half had PhDs, and they used their educations to cloak evil in scientific and legalistic-sounding theories and ideas. Why does this matter today? We are experiencing a rise in anti-Semitism globally, including right here at home. As in the past, it often begins with social exclusion. On some university campuses, Jews have been blocked by mobs from entering certain spaces. At the University of California, Berkeley School of Law campus, various campus groups, as we speak, are attempting to write into their bylaws a prohibition on interacting with anybody holding Zionist views, a view that the overwhelming majority of American Jews hold. Violence against Jews, simply because they are Jews, has reemerged and reared its ugly head as well. From violent blockading of synagogues to gunning down Jews on the streets of Washington, D.C., our fellow Jewish citizens have been targeted by domestic terrorists imbued with violent ideology that they have imbibed from the darkest corners of the internet. As in 1930s Germany, these actions are often perpetrated by the educated elites of our nation, framed in intellectual language, giving them a veneer of legitimacy. Sometimes people are said to just be asking questions. So what do we do to stop this resurgence? And for that, we can again turn to the wise words of Justice Scalia. In his speech, he quoted St. John Henry Newman, who wrote that knowledge is one thing, virtue is another. Good sense is not conscience, refinement is not humility. and I couldn't agree more. The task in front of all of us here today as federal employees and people of conscience is a difficult but straightforward one. We must defend our values as Americans, as Westerners, as heirs to this great civilization. Our values that hold that all men are created equal. Our belief in a country where, in the words of George Washington in his letter to the Hebrew congregation in Newport, everyone can sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. As the head of the Civil Rights Division, I am proud to serve alongside many other colleagues in the United States Department of Justice who are fighting every single day to protect these very values. This administration is committed to defending our founding ideals and applying their protections to all Americans, not just to the select few. Under President Trump and the Attorney General's leadership, the Department of Justice will confront anti-Jewish bigotry and ensure peace and security for all people of faith. We are and will continue to aggressively prosecute individuals and organizations who attack Jews, and we will ensure that our institutions of higher learning treat students and faculty with the dignity to which they are all entitled, and all of us are entitled. The significance of the Holocaust, the horrors of the genocide, and the absence of human decency must never be lost on us. Enforcing our constitutional and statutory laws against the violence and harassment that Jewish Americans face around us today is but one way that the United States continues to preserve its founding values and advance its promise that we will never forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Harmeet Dillon. Please join me now in welcoming our guest of honor, Colonel Frank Cohn. Frank was able to escape Nazi Germany and come to the United States soon after turning 18 years old when he was drafted into the U.S. military, became a U.S. citizen during basic training, and served in Europe during World War II. He served during the Battle of the Bulge and in other campaigns, and later worked as a German-speaking interpreter, contributing to war crime prosecutions. After the war, Frank earned his bachelor's and master's degrees and built a 35-year military career. Joining him on stage is Claire McMahon, program assistant for the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and moderator for today's presentation. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Colonel Cohn.
Thank you so much, Ronald. It is an honor to be here, and thank you all. Thank you all for taking time to join us today for this special program. As mentioned, my name is Claire McMahon, and I work in the Office of Survivor Affairs at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where I have the privilege of working with nearly 40 Holocaust survivors who choose to volunteer their time at the museum on a regular basis. And as mentioned, you have the unique opportunity to hear from Colonel Frank Cohn. And over the course of the next 25 minutes or so, I will be engaged in conversation with Frank as he speaks about his Holocaust experiences. And if time allows, we will address 1 to 2 questions submitted in advance from our audience. But with that, I would like to formally introduce our featured speaker, Colonel Frank Cohn. And Frank, I know we have so much to learn from you in just a short amount of time, so let's jump right into our conversation. Frank, you were born on August 2nd, 1925 in Breslau, Germany, and your family was well integrated into the local community. Your dad owned a local sporting goods store, and your parents maintained relationships and friendships with both Jews and non-Jews in your community. However, this comfortable life was disrupted in 1933 when Adolf Hitler was appointed chancellor, when you were in the 3rd grade. Now, Frank, could you tell us, what was it like to go to public school at that time?
Well, let's start when I got to start schooling, and that was in 1932, before Hitler My first grade teacher, I can't remember much about him. He was old. He was at least 50 years old. But my second grade teacher came in, a very vigorous person, young person, and I practically fell in love with him. He was just great. And when I heard that he was coming back in the third grade, I was all excited and anticipating his arrival. But when he came in, my heart dropped. He came in complete Nazi uniform, and I realized he was no longer my friend. He was the enemy, because even at that early age, I had recognized that the Nazis were dangerous, and they were the enemy of the Jews, and I was a Jew. But he kept order in the class. He didn't want to have any problems, yet I had to sit down while the others sang their Nazi songs, and a kid who's sitting down is not going to be very popular. As a matter of fact, I was an outcast. I was the only Jewish kid in the class. But after school, it was a different situation. They started calling me all kinds of names. And then one fine day, I realized they were ready to beat me up. And I took off running, and they came after me, but I was a pretty good runner. And I beat them, and I got home okay, and I told my parents, and they immediately took steps to get me out of the German public school into a Jewish private school, and there I lived happily ever after.
Just unimaginable, Frank, trying to make sense of all of this as just a young boy at the time. And things continued to take a turn for the worse in 1935 when the Nuremberg race laws were passed, which essentially denied Jews their German citizenship and stripped them of their rights. Now, Frank, what sort of restrictions did you and your family face at this point in time in Germany?
Well, of course, there was complete segregation, and we could not do very much at all with any of the Germans, because the 1935 law indicated that the separation was complete. My parents, after they had sold their sporting goods store, started to sell bales of cloth to the various people who needed cloths, like tailors and such. But of course, in 35, all the German customers were lost, and on the Jewish side, more and more of the customers were lost too, as they started to escape. But escape was very narrow, and not very many people were able to get out of Germany that way, because nobody wanted refugees. And of course, if we were to leave, we were refugees. But my father, when he went to find out the people to give him an affidavit, he went on a visitor's visa. And on a visitor's visa, coming out of Germany, you were only allowed to take one suitcase and 10 marks. That's all. So he was immediately at the mercy of the Jewish relief organizations.
Frank, it was these descriptions that you described a couple of moments ago, and you already mentioned this, but life became so difficult for Jews that many families attempted to emigrate to other countries. You mentioned that your father traveled to the United States in the hopes of securing a financial affidavit of support. But while he was away, the Gestapo came to your and your mother's apartment looking for your father. Could you tell us more about this encounter you had with the Gestapo?
What had happened was that my father found a distant relatives that he was looking for, but they were not in a financial condition to provide him an affidavit. So he had to stay a little longer. Now, that seemed like it was a catastrophe at the time, but it really saved his life, because by staying longer, he missed the 2 Gestapo agents that came to our door looking for him. My mother told them that he was on an international business trip, and she was instructed that the minute he returned, he was to report to Gestapo headquarters. Well, that sort of raised a red light in her brain, because she remembered that a business acquaintance of theirs by the name of Michaelis had been instructed to report to Gestapo headquarters, and about 2 or 3 hours later, they found him dead on the sidewalk in front of the headquarters, where he had either jumped or been pushed out of a 3rd-story window. So she wrote my father to stay where he was. And then a couple of weeks later, a British lady came to our door, and she had an official documents that indicated that we had to provide her with a bedroom in our apartment. And my mother took me aside and said, now this lady is a Gestapo informant, so be very careful what we say here in this apartment. Well, actually, the lady was a British lady, and she seemed very nice. She gave me 2 English lessons. I never realized at the point how valuable they were going to be for me. But another thing happened, and that was just coincidentally that all the passports of the Jews were being collected to be stamped with a J for Jew, and that was to show immediately when the passport was shown as to who they were dealing with. Well, actually, this was not at the German initiative. This was at the Swiss initiative, because they wanted to see who was coming across their border, so that if they saw a refugee, they could say, no, no, you can't come in. But that's life. Anyway,
Frank, if you
we
could tell us.
proceeded at that point, that is my mother did, to go to the consulate in Breslau and get herself a visitor's visa as well, because it seemed like she was afraid that the next point was the confiscation of the passports. Well, then completely out of character, she went back the next day and bribed somebody in the consulate to put me as well on that visa. Well, first of all, it was lucky they didn't have computers, because if they had realized that my father was already in country, they would have realized that we were not going to be visitors of the United States. We were going to be refugees, and she never would have gotten the visa to come in. But then she said one fine day, let's go for a walk. And I knew immediately this was important. And when we went outside, she said to me, should we go? And I knew immediately what she meant, that we were to take off to the United States and leave Germany. Now, this was not an easy question for me, because all my friends were there. I was very happy in my Jewish school, and I was on a soccer team, and I had a good position. Of course, we can only play other Jewish teams because of the segregation. But in any event, the smartest thing I ever did in my whole life was I said, let's go, because I knew we were not wanted in that country and that the Nazis were dangerous people. And it was a good thing that I did that, because a kid who doesn't want to go could have procrastinated and get everything shoved off. And in a second you'll see why that would have been fatal. Because one fine morning, my mother says, tomorrow morning we're going. And I had one more soccer game to play, but I was distracted and I helped them lose the game. And at the end I said, well, see you next time, because my mother had instructed me that I was never to tell anybody what we were going to do. But of course I knew we were not going to see them next time. And I also never did find out whatever happened to these kids, because if they hadn't done some advanced planning to get out, they would have been stuck. Because as we left, we ended up in New York on the 30th of October 1938.
Frank, we'll
And
talk
then
more
on
about
the
this
9th of November, on the 11th of November was Crystal Night.
We'll speak more about this in just a couple of moments, but I could not imagine what it was like to have to navigate this decision-making process, again, at such a young age, Frank. But could you tell us more about your voyage to the United States? What was that like for you to go on a ship bound for a country that you've never been to?
I'm sorry.
What was it like, the voyage to the United States, being a passenger on the ship?
Yeah. Well, as we came, well, of course, my mother had been able to get first-class tickets on the Holland America line, and I thought this was a terrific adventure for me, and I lived it up, and I had a wonderful time in that trip. But my mother didn't, because she knew about Ellis Island. And in Ellis Island, there were interrogations. And if it was found out that my father was already in country, they would realize we were refugees, put on the next boat back to Germany. And goodness, I don't know what would have happened had we gotten back to Germany, because the British lady by then would have realized that we had taken off. So that would have been a concentration camp for sure. Well, in any event, as we were getting into the harbor, I did what my gym teacher had told me when he came to visit the United States. He said, when you get to New York Harbor, you go up in the front of the boat, and if you have a camera, you take your pictures of the skyscrapers that you'll see and the Statue of Liberty, and he explained exactly what the Statue of Liberty really meant. And I was there, and I did just what he said, and I had my box camera, I took my pictures. There were the skyscrapers, there was the statue, and then an announcement came over the speaker system that said, all first-class passengers are invited to go through customs and then immediately onto the dock. And when my mother, who had had such a terrible voyage, worrying about the arrival, when she found out, she was, of course, elated, because that made all the difference in the world. And we had a wonderful reunion with my father. And he said, but we're not completely out of the woods yet, because the Jewish relief organizations said that their assistance is finite, and as soon as we have an affidavit, we have to go back to Germany and wait for the invitation to immigrate. Well, that wouldn't have worked very well, would it? But here again, things got saved.
Absolutely, Frank, and I would like to highlight that the image we are looking at was taken by Colonel Frank Cohn in your arrival into New York City. But Frank, as you mentioned a little bit earlier in our program, 10 days after you arrived in the United States on November 9th through 10th, 1938, Nazi leaders unleashed a series of violent pogroms or organized attacks against the Jewish population across Germany in an event known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. And in response, in the United States, President Roosevelt issued an executive order to extend the visas of all Germans traveling to the United States to temporary visas, which meant that you and your family were able to stay in the United States. You were immediately enrolled in junior high school in New York, Frank, and upon your arrival, and you acclimated to life. However, in September of 1943, just 1 month after your 18th birthday, you were drafted into the United States Army. Frank, could you tell us more about being drafted into the Army and attending basic training?
Well, when you get into the Army, you go to a reception center. And I went off to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And you stay in Fort Dix just about 3 or 4 days, and then you get orders to go to basic training. Well, everybody who came in with me got their orders, except me. So I went to my sergeant, I said, how come I didn't get orders? He said, let me check. He came back, he said, well, you're an enemy alien. I said, I'm an enemy alien? He said, sure. You were born in Germany. You came over on a German passport. You never got naturalized because you came over on a visitor's visa. And as far as the United States government's concerned, you're German, and Germans are the enemy. So you're going to be investigated by the FBI. Well, it was bad enough that I had the label of enemy or alien, but it was all so bad that on the second day when I came in, they put me on KP, which is kitchen police. They wake you up in the morning at 4 o'clock, and they put you in the kitchen, and you're there till about 8 o'clock on things like peeling potatoes. Of course, that was a complete waste, because when I get potatoes now, they all got a skin on them anyway. Nobody is doing that, but I did. But only on this one day, because I went back to the sergeant and I said, Sergeant, okay, I'm going to be here a while, but I know a little bit about the enemy, about the U.S. Army. I was in ROTC in high school, and I had one ROTC course in college in his summer term just before I got drafted. I know the close order drill, I know the terminology, I know some of the tactics, things like that. And the sergeant said, wonderful, we'll make you an acting gadget. What's an acting gadget? He said, well, here there's an armband, and it has corporal stripes on it, and you wear that armband, and when the new recruits come in, you now being a veteran of 4 days, you form them up, and you march them to the theater to see the 2 films that you saw on the second day when you came in. I said, wonderful. And sure enough, A group came in, I formed them up, and up, 2, 3, 4, up, 2, 3, 4. I had them all formed up and in step, and we got to the theater, and we saw a film, Why We Fight, which was very good orientation of why we were in the war. And the second film was How to Avoid Venereal Disease. I saw that film more than anybody else in the United States Army. Well, anyway, it was about 3 months that it took before the FBI cleared me, and I got orders to go to Fort Benning, Georgia for basic training. And about 3 weeks later, they took me to Fort Benning, Georgia, and swore me in as a U.S. citizen. And boy, was I proud. I was now a U.S. citizen and just as good as everybody. Thank you. And I am proud of that to this day, believe me.
An extraordinary moment, Frank, and thank you for telling us about that moment that you were sworn in as a U.S. citizen. And I know that there is so much that you could share about your experience in the U.S. Army throughout the war, but I am cognizant of the time. And behind us is a list of names of family members, Frank, who were murdered during the Holocaust. Could you tell us about how you found out about their fate and what happened to family that stayed in Germany?
Well, of course, it was very difficult to know exactly what was going on. And while I was still, after the war had ended and I was in the occupation, my mother wrote me to find out about her older sister as to what had happened to her, because she last knew she was in Berlin, and I should see if I could get to Berlin. And I saw my chief of documents. I was translating documents in those days, and asked him if he has any reason to send anybody to Berlin to send me, and he was very cooperative. Off I went to Berlin. I got to the Red Cross, and they had wonderful lists, and they found the name of my aunt, which was Greta Loewenstein, and I checked, and they said that she had been placed into a concentration camp. It was Theresienstadt. But after that, they had taken her out of Theresienstadt, and they had a list that showed that she was evacuated to Auschwitz. And as far as Auschwitz concerned, they had lists of people who were liberated as we came from Auschwitz, and she was not on that list, which meant she died in Auschwitz. I wrote that to my mother. At that point, it was leaked as to what was happening to people, because the Germans who had started this problem of gassing people as they were evacuated to the east, and then to burn their bodies to get rid of the evidence. This was all top secret, but it started to leak out, and I could tell that something like that had happened to my aunt, and I wrote my mother that she's dead, there's no question. But for the rest of my family, I didn't find out anything until I got home after the occupation, which meant about 1946. and it seemed that there were 11 people of our extended family who had died in concentration camps. There were 6 on my father's side and 5 on my mother's side. Now, usually I don't like to do numbers because numbers does not honor the people who died. You need names, but we don't want to do that right now. Anyway, we had the names, and they're right here all the time.
Thank you, Frank, for sharing that with us. And I'm so gratified that we are able to take a moment to honor your immediate family members today through this program. So thank you for your willingness to share. And I am cognizant of the time, and it looks like we have time for one question submitted from our audience in advance. And Frank, this participant, is curious to know, what did liberation mean for you as both a Jew and an American soldier? So what did liberation mean for you as both a Jew and an American soldier?
Well, of course, when I left Germany, I was a victim. And when I became the American citizen, I was no longer a victim. I was in charge. But being in charge, I was very careful because we sure didn't want to become like them. Everything was going to be done by the book. What it was that you were supposed to do, that is what we did. And I had no way of taking any revenge. That was not my function, and I understood that, and I didn't do that. It was completely different, though, being in charge versus being a victim. And I felt very good. Let me just give you one example of the irony of the whole thing. When we went into Frankfurt, while we had, our mission was to go into the big cities right after the infantry. And we had personality targets and building targets. Building targets was anything that the U.S. force could use in the occupation, as well as anything that could be needed for the prosecution of the war criminals. And the personality targets, of course, were the war criminals. Well, as we got into Frankfurt, they told us we had a lot of German officers taken prisoner, and they wanted to get rid of most of them, but they wanted to keep those who had information that might be valuable for us, to separate them. So that was what we were told to do. And we separated the people, and as well as I did that, some people went right back into the prisoner of war camp, and they were not bothered anymore by any interrogation. But those who seemed to have some intelligence value were separated for deeper interrogation, which was not my responsibility. Well, anyway, there was a major general in front of me standing at attention, and I asked him for his name, and he very sharply told me that it was August Wilhelm von Hohenzollern. When von Hohenzollern was the aristocracy, I knew that from my German education, and who I had in front of me was the crown prince of the Kaiser. And he was at attention. He was a Waffen-SS Major General, and he was doing exactly what I told him to do by this young 19-year-old Jewish kid. How do you like that one, huh?
Frank, thank you so much for your willingness to share just a bit about your Holocaust experiences and your war experiences with us. And I know that there's, again, so much more that you could share, but just taking another moment to thank you for your willingness to speak and answer our questions today. Before we conclude this portion of our program, I would like to highlight that Holocaust survivors like Frank are our best teachers about the consequences of unchecked hatred and unchecked anti-Semitism, and the history of the Holocaust serves as both a lesson and a warning and can inspire each of us to think about our own roles and responsibilities as we respond to the challenges that confront our world. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Ronald Piaseczny for the remainder of the program.
Thank you, Colonel Cohen, for that incredible, inspiring story and for being here today with us. It's meant a lot. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce two incredible individuals from the U.S. State Department, Undersecretary for Economic Affairs Jacob Hellberg and Special Envoy for Holocaust Issues Ellen Germain. Undersecretary Hellberg is a technology and cybersecurity expert. He is also the grandson of two Holocaust survivors. Unfortunately, he couldn't join us in person, but he sent us this video.
My name is Jacob Hellberg, and I'm the Undersecretary of State for Economic Affairs. This month, the United States commemorates the National Days of Holocaust Remembrance. Doing so underscores our commitment to remember the victims of the Holocaust, honor those survivors, and ensure that historical truth is preserved for future generations. Holocaust remembrance is deeply personal to me. My grandparents were Auschwitz survivors. They endured unspeakable dehumanization. But my grandparents survived, and after liberation, they came to the United States with little more than hope. Initially, they didn't speak English. They believed in hard work. My grandfather worked by day in a factory and by night as a hospital janitor to build a better life for his family. They believed that memories carries responsibility, and they understood that preserving historical truth requires vigilance and commitment. Their experiences impressed upon me that the opportunities we have today are not guaranteed. That sense of duty informs our work in government as public servants. Remembrance isn't passive, it requires action. It requires us to ensure that the facts of the Holocaust remain accessible and that distortion and denial are confronted. It's also incumbent upon us not only to ensure that future generations understand the sheer scale of genocide, but also that each and every one of the 6 million murdered in the Holocaust represents a precious human life cut cruelly short. It is my honor to share my family's story at the Federal Interagency Holocaust Remembrance Program. I'm deeply grateful to be among colleagues from across the U.S. government who know that remembrance is really not only about looking back, it's about carrying forward a solemn responsibility to preserve, to educate, and to act against anti-Semitism and other dehumanizing, dangerous hatreds in our day. As Undersecretary for Economic Affairs at the State Department, I want to say that today that responsibility intersects with a major technological transformation, the emergence of AI. As technology evolves, international coordination will become increasingly more important to ensuring that historical truth is preserved and accessible. My grandparents' story reminds me that memory is not self-sustaining. It depends on each generation carrying it forward. The tools available to us today are different from those of the past, but the responsibility remains the same. We must use the tools of our time to preserve truth, treasure the memories of the survivors, honor the lives lost, uphold the dignity of those whose stories we remember, and educate future generations. It is an honor to join all of you in that effort.
Thank you, Undersecretary Hellberg. And now I'd like to introduce Ellen Germain, the United States Special Envoy for Holocaust Issues. A career member of the Senior Foreign Service, she leads U.S. efforts to advance Holocaust remembrance, support survivors, and pursue a measure of justice through restitution and compensation. In recent years, this event would not be possible without her leadership and the dedication of her deputy, whose commitment ensures that we continue to honor Holocaust victims, survivors, and heirs with purpose each year. Ellen?
Thank you very much, Ron. Undersecretary of State Hellberg's account of his grandparents' survival underscores their resilience in the face of the, as he said, unspeakable dehumanization of Auschwitz. Colonel Cohn's story illustrates how survival was not only a matter of chance, but also of his parents and his courage and resourcefulness. No matter how many different tales of survival I hear, I am always moved. And although they're stories of survival, they are also stories of loss. Loss of the Jewish communities where Undersecretary Hellberg's parents and Colonel Cohn and his family lived. And loss of their extended families, as Colonel Cohn so movingly spoke about just now. They remind us of our responsibility to confront anti-Semitism, safeguard historical truth, and translate memory into action. It's for that reason that the United States Department of State has an office dedicated to Holocaust issues, and it's my honor to be the U.S. government's special envoy and lead on these issues and on seeking a measure of justice for Holocaust survivors and heirs. We advocate for restitution and compensation for property seized by the Nazis during the Holocaust, and we promote accurate Holocaust education and commemoration worldwide, and devote ourselves to trying to counter Holocaust denial and distortion, which Holocaust distortion in particular is alarmingly on the rise these days. I would now like to recognize and honor the survivors and descendants of survivors who are here with us today. Would the survivors and the descendants please stand if you are able to do so? We are deeply honored by your presence, and we bear witness to your courage and your enduring legacy. And I'd now like to invite everyone to stand, please, if you are able to do so. And we are going to light the candles that were placed on your chairs, and please join me in a moment of silence. Okay, so on the bottom, yep. Please join me in a moment of silence to remember the victims of the Holocaust, the 6 million innocent Jewish men, women, and children who were persecuted, endured unimaginable suffering, and whose lives and futures were stolen in an act of profound and unfathomable evil. May this moment strengthen our collective commitment to remembrance, to truth, and to ensuring that such atrocities are never repeated. Please join me in these moments of silence. Thank you all for joining us all here today. Your presence reflects a collective commitment to honoring the victims, supporting survivors, and ensuring that the lessons of the Holocaust endure for future generations. Let me close by quoting what Secretary of State Marco Rubio said this year on January 27th, on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. The United States will always counter anti-Semitism worldwide, champion justice for Holocaust survivors and heirs, and defend the integrity of Holocaust memory. And I'll now turn the podium back to Ronald.
You know, be seated. As we conclude the program, I want to give special thanks to my colleagues on the Executive Organizing Committee, Vice Co-Chairs, Tracy Pirelli from the State Department and Hillary Miller from the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, also Wendy Dornberg and Erica Mocha-Sewell from the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and Michael Orloff from the National Endowment for the Arts. A note about this event is that the Federal Interagency Holocaust Remembrance Program, we are all made up of federal employees who deeply care and honor Holocaust survivors. We believe education is one of the most meaningful ways that we can make a difference by preserving the memory of those who were persecuted and honoring the lives of those who survived. Each year, this program happens because some federal employee steps forward and convinces his or her agency to host it. This year, we thought we may be out of luck, but thanks to Charlotte Perez and Grace Johnson here at the Department of Justice, this tradition continues one more year. For more than 3 decades, this organizing committee has carried on through word of mouth and shared commitment. If you're a federal employee and want to make a difference in countering Holocaust distortion and denial, which are forms of anti-Semitism, and if you'd like to showcase your agency's leadership on an important topic, we're looking for new committee members and a host agency for next year. Federal employees from across the government are welcome. You don't even have to be based here in Washington, D.C., as, for example, I work in Buffalo, New York, and my leadership supports my efforts. If you're interested in joining, please reach out to myself or Tracy Pirelli. I'd like to thank our sign language interpreters. Special thank you to Diane Saltzman and Claire McMahon from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, who helped identify our guest speaker this year. And of course, a special thank you once again to Colonel Cohn for being here and for sharing your story. As we leave here today, may we carry the memories of and the inspiration of those Holocaust survivors like Colonel Cohn. This concludes the 33rd Annual Federal Interagency Holocaust Remembrance Program. With sincere gratitude, we thank you all for coming today, and for those in our virtual audience, thank you for tuning in. Thank you, everyone.